guys, welcome back. I am here to help you with step 2 of our quilt along. If you guys have gotten all of your 2 patches and 3 patches, some of them were 3 patches from last week, depending on which method you chose, we're going to just hurry. We're going to show you how to put these together in video format, not just on the instructions. So in the instructions, I talked about the direction that the seam allowances lay. I talked about matching up and nesting those seams real well together so that they kind of interlock. So let's chat about that for just a sec. The seam allowance on this piece is on the bottom, and I kind of told you to lay them vertically so that they were facing like 12 and 6 o'clock. The seam allowance is going to face that 6 o'clock section towards me. It's underneath. I can't really see it, but I can feel it and I know it's there. The other one that I'm putting on top, I'm putting that seam allowance facing 12 o'clock, and again, just nesting those one on top of another. In the middle, you can feel when those seam allowances nest together. The bulk on the bottom is on one side, the bulk on the top seam allowance is above, and so you can feel when those two come together really well. When you make sure that those nest good together, the block is going to have really nice matching corners in the center intersection, and it's going to lay its flattest. I'm going to go ahead and stitch this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance along that right hand edge. Making sure I don't hardly ever pin when I use this method because it's not necessary. Those seam allowances, if you use a consistent seam allowance, they really do nest together very well. So I've pre-matched some blocks to make this bit a little bit faster, just so you can keep seeing. Again, seam allowance, and I try to put the one on the bottom facing 6 o'clock and the one on the top facing 12 o'clock. The reason for that is as the feed dogs pull, they're not going to pull that seam allowance to the other direction. Every now and then seams flip, but ordinarily that happens when the presser foot goes over a seam that's facing up. It's a whole lot easier to control that when you can see it. I tend to run my finger alongside the presser foot, holding that down, and it kind of keeps that seam from flipping the wrong direction. As we chain piece these, they're pretty easy to do. I often will check and just make sure that my seams are coming together exactly the way I want, that's a really nice matched corner. We're not dealing with big huge blocks with lots and lots of little points. We're not even dealing with triangles, so just making sure that we're paying attention to those intersections makes a huge difference in how our quilts are going to come out. I've only got a few more of these to put together, so I'll just sew a few more and see what we can do with them. Are you guys enjoying this quilt along? Are you having fun with it? I was surprised by how quickly these 2 patches sewed together today. Again, Alright. So now that we have a bunch of 4 patches done, we're going to turn our 4 patches into 6 patches. Again, I try to just make sure visually that those patches come together really well in the center. And I'm going to find another piece of fabric that'll look good with our block. I pay attention to the seam allowances underneath. Those do matter as we try and put quilts together so that we can make sure that things nest up really good. I try to make sure that as I do them, I don't have the exact same fabric. Like this one, this yellow fabric and this yellow fabric are the same. I don't necessarily want those together in the same 6 patch. So I just try and just make sure that as I do these, the seam allowances are facing the right direction and that I'm choosing the ones that'll match up the best and lay flat. So again, just nesting up those seams together. We'll just run this under the machine. Alrighty, these ones match up well. The colors are similar, but they're not the same pattern. So I just match these up again, lay them flat. I do try to make sure that side to side they're getting matched up too, laying them together with the seams together. Sometimes those little jelly rolls have those pinking edges, and those are what I try to run along the edge to go underneath presser foot and right along that quarter inch seam mark on my machine's curve plate. There we go. So 2 patch turns into 4 patch, turns into 6 patch. Those seams alternate as you look at the back. You can see that they match up and they go in opposite directions. That's going to make ironing them later a lot easier, but it also just reduces bulk in your quilt overall. So there's a 6 patch. If you have a flannel wall, you can hook them to the flannel wall. Just kind of assembled this last night. Hopefully it stays up. Oh, I've got those 2 side by side, but it won't matter in the long run. There's so many. We'll do. So we're going to add a white bar. Whoops. Sometimes, okay, my flannel wall is self-hanging. It doesn't have a wall behind it, so I'm not pushing hard enough to get that to stick. I'll use pins. I do this a lot downstairs, even up against the wall. My husband helped me make a little self-standing flannel wall. We had the quilt hung over it the other day, but and we used a different frame. So we made a special frame just for this, just so we could start. So next week, we're going to add on the straight rectangle that's going to turn that into like the modified 9 patch, and then they're going to rotate. So one will be on one side, and then you rotate it 90 degrees, and it'll just kind of go back and forth. So you can kind of get an idea that if I used white fabric here, that's kind of going to look like that. There'll be a bar here and a bar here, and the quilt kind of zigzags along. So it's a pretty easy pattern overall, and it's just a matter of trying to make sure that we have enough variety in our blocks so that everything doesn't look identical. Let's move on to the 3 patches. The 3 patches turn into 6 patches pretty easy. This was the second batch I did. I did 2 sets so I could show you each method. So this side will stick these. So that's one of the 6 patches for the other side. I'm just grabbing my little piles. As I cut my strips, I kind of just left them in the piles and just kind of match them up and make them work as we go along. So this one, the seam allowances are going to face down. The next batch, my seam allowances are going to face up. It's the same thing. As your seam allowances go in opposite directions, they ought to nest up really, really well with one another. I use a neutral thread in my machine almost all the time. It's kind of like a cream color. I leave that in there all the time because it blends well. I also use light gray sometimes, just depends on what I've got in my stash. But right now I've got like a cream color and it works really good with almost everything. Just nest those blocks together. They match themselves up fairly simply. And I don't even bother with them since they nest together so well. That was the first batch. That one's going to come over here. This one's going to just lay right on top. And you can feel those seams through all the different layers, so you really don't have to pin. Just line them up well and then stitch. So you have half as many to do this week if you did the 3 patches, because you did more last week by sewing 3 at once. Alrighty. You can see on this one too how well those seams have come together in the intersections. And that's just without any pins, just making sure that you're using even seam allowances each time, that you press your lines in the same direction on each strip, and then make sure that as you sew them together, they're facing in opposite directions. that is it. All we're doing this week is 6 patches. As you get them done, you can kind of start to see how your quilt's going to come together. I bought this flannel, I think I got it at Joann's, and it's just a piece of wide-backed flannel. It's like 120 inches wide. We made the flannel wall by just hanging basically a closet rod between 2 upright posts. I have one downstairs in my sewing room. The sewing room is just small, so I can't get the camera and everything in there, but it's actually part of my bedroom. The flannel, I just hemmed a sleeve into it and slid the closet rod right into that to make it easy for me. So next week we'll have more up here and you'll see how the quilt comes together, but it's a pretty easy project. I really like this. I love the bright colors. I'm so inspired by some of your fabric choices that I've been watching online on the web page. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to message me. If anything that I've given you isn't clear enough, or if you have a way to make it better, please let me know, and we'll try and share those with everyone else. You guys have a wonderful night. We'll see you soon. Take care.